be discussing about the New South. Okay. It is almost like Reconstruction Part 3 because the focus was still on the South. The New South after the Civil War. All over the South after the Civil War there were Confederate cemeteries. The Lost Cause, as it was called, is a myth that many white Southerners believed in after the Civil War. It is an idealized and romanticized version of the Old South. Most Southerners believed that they were on the right side of history. They believed that the North were the ones who were oppressors. During the Civil War, the Southern Army represented chivalry and honor and were honorable. They believed that the South fought for a noble cause, establishing memorial statues in part of the lost cause. Most Southerners viewed it as a horrible time period in history. Then you have redemption. Redemption means to redeem or salvation. But at this time it means that when the South is going to be restored the white conservation democratic rule. And you have Gone with the Wind. Is a book and a movie that romanticizes the Old South, written by the Atlantic native Margaret Mitchell. It also deals with the Reconstruction time period. It is a novel. The book came out in 1936 and the movie came out in 1939. The movie is a winner of many different Academy Awards. The novel was very popular. It sold about 30 million copies. Then you have Joel Chandler Harris. In 1881, he published Uncle Remus. He was from Georgia. He spent a lot of time in Atlanta. He pictures slavery as a happy time period in his book. The character in his book are Bear Fox and Bear and Bear Rabbit. Then even turned into the Disney film music adaptation. There is a controversy over the Georgia flag. The controversy is the use of the Confederate flag within the state flag. They say that it is a part of history, and some say it is a symbol of racism. They made some changes to the flag. Then we have a word that is called the Redeemers. They also called the Redeemers because they saved the South from black rule during Reconstruction. White planters represent the Redeemers. White planters class voted Democratic Party for whites. In order to prevent that from happening, white planters represented the Redeemers. White plantation class voted Democratic Party. The biggest threat to the power of white planter class would be having been a possible alliance between blacks and poor whites. In order to prevent that from happening, white planter class called for the race card. They made an alliance with all poor whites. Bare bones. It is a French word which means aristocrat. White planter class called them bare bones. They even compared themselves to European aristocrats. The Old South had a few industries. That was one of the many reasons why the South lost the Civil War. They were outproduced. The North could produce more cannons, more bullets, and more uniforms. In the South, in the New South time period, there were new industries. The South became a major textile center. Besides that, there were a lot of steel, lumber, iron, tobacco were all increased. The leading tobacco growing state in the South was North Carolina. James Duke was a tobacco industrialist. He is even the founder of Duke University, built like medieval Gothic look. There was still some problem with the economy of the South. Workers in factories were uneducated, unskilled, and were paid low wages. The South still remained rural. Cotton was still the #1 industry. Most people still made money from farming. The New South was still behind the North. The North was leading in terms of industry in the country. Birmingham, Alabama was the key iron steel producing city in 1877. The southern states spent the lowest amount of money per student on education. The states of the North Dakota spent more money on education than North Carolina. The South still has the lowest illiteracy rate in the entire nation. Then we have urbanization. Urbanization is a growth of rising cities. There was a rise in the interior inland cities that are not in the coast like Atlanta, Birmingham, and Dallas in population. Still, the South was behind behind the North in urbanization, education, economy, even after the Civil War. The #1 industry in Georgia at this time was cotton. The #2 industry in Georgia was lumber. Just like the rest of the South, Georgia at this time was predominantly rural. In 1886, John Pemberton founded the Coca-Cola in Georgia. In 1889, Pemberton sold Coca-Cola to Asa G. Candler. Originally, Coca-Cola did have cocaine. It was sold all over the United States of America and the world. The colonial capital of Georgia was Savannah. From 1806 to 1868, Mill Giver, after the Civil War, the capital changed to Atlanta. In the New South, most blacks were uneducated, landless, and impoverished. This enfranchisement means the loss of voting rights for all African Americans. There were techniques used to prevent blacks from voting, like poll tax. It means that you have to pay money to vote. Poll tax was used against poor whites and Americans. Many African Americans could not afford to pay poll tax. Another technique used was literacy tests. This is where the blacks had to prove that they can read the English language, and sometimes they used to use trickery by making them read foreign languages. The third method was the grandfather clause. It states that if your grandfather could not vote, you could not vote. This automatically eliminated all the African Americans. This enfranchisement started in the late mid-1870s, and it ended in the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s all the way to the 60s. disenfranchisement lasted about 100 years. Then we have segregation was practiced all over the South. There were special facilities for whites and there were special facilities for blacks. There were things like schools, water fountains, bathrooms, railroads, theaters, and restaurants. They were completely segregated. Then we have a special case, a very famous case. Plessy versus Ferguson was a very important Supreme Court case in 1896. In 7-1 decision, the Supreme Court said that the suggestion is legal and constitutional. It began in Louisiana. Plessy was a black man. He went on a white-only railway. He was arrested in Louisiana. He ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court. Ferguson was the name of the Louisiana judge. Another name for segregation is the Jim Crow law. Jim Crow laws. All the states in the South passed the segregation law. There was an increase in Klan lynching all over the South. In 1890, there were about 150 blacks lynched every year. There is a film called The Birth of a Nation. It's a very famous film. It came out in 1950. It was a silent black and white film. The producer and the director was D.W. Griffin. It is a very racist film. The film praised the KKK. It is the first film that they showed in the White House, and President Woodrow Wilson, he loved that film. Then you have Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. They were prominent black leaders in the South. Booker T. Washington was born in Virginia. He was freed in his early childhood. He was an author and a leader for blacks. He argued in the accommodation theory. It was the idea that blacks should accommodate. It means that accept. Accommodate means to accept themselves to the existence of racial inequality. He also founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. He stressed that all blacks should seek vocational jobs, things like working in factories, railroads, and mill jobs. W.E.B. Du Bois had a very different view. He was not born a slave. He was a black civil rights activist, historian, scholar, and an author. He was born in Massachusetts and he died in Guam, Africa. He rejected Booker T. Washington's accommodation theory and said that blacks should challenge the existence of racial inequality. He argued that blacks should seek professional education. He wanted them to become something higher like teachers, lawyers, or doctors. He is also the founder of the NAACP, which is the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, founded in 1910. Originally, there was a disagreement between Du Bois and other black leaders allowing whites to join the NAACP. Eventually Du Bois let both whites and blacks join the NAACP. Now, what is the New South? Basically, you have new things like industry, education, the end of slavery, hospital, urbanization, and an economy. Basically, what stayed the same is racism and poverty. Birth of a Nation is a movie that portrays black negatively. The film portrays the Klan as heroes. It also portrays the Civil War and Reconstruction as a bad time period for the South. Thank you for watching The New South.